Welcome back. I left off in the middle of chapter 5 where Mr. Hartman explains Thomas Paine's view of democracy. Paine insisted that the right to rule belonged in the hands of the people. The government and people in government had no right to rule. This is crucial to understand, so let me put it another way. In a real Thomas Paine-style democracy, people in positions of power are granted whatever power they might have by the people. They have no real power themselves, not in a real democracy. This flew right in the face of Edmund Burke-type elites who believed, and still do believe, that what they call the state, which to them means a ruling elite class, have a permanent automatic right to rule. To them, this is a natural fact. Because it might be hard for some people to accept that there are in fact elites who believe this, Mr. Hartman throws in another quote from Edmund Burke, where he says, essentially, "The occupations of skilled tradespeople can't be considered honorable, much less the occupations of people doing more menial jobs. Such people shouldn't suffer oppression from the state, but the state suffers oppression if such people individually or collectively are allowed to rule." In other words, Edmund Burke types take for granted a permanent ruling elite class, the state, that auto-freaking-matically has a right to rule, that would suffer oppression if the other class, us less than honorable workers, us commoners, had any right to rule. Again, to them, Edmund Burke types, it's a natural fact that they have the right to rule. I think what makes this hard to see is the fact that the vast majority of elites are not members of that ruling class. They're just happy, shiny graduates of elite colleges doing high-paying jobs and helpful to that class in some way. Too dumb to know, actually too ignorant to know, that this ruling elite class even exists. Back to Thomas Paine, I already knew he was a badass supporter of democracy. What I did not know until I read this book was that Paine foresaw, had already figured out exactly how Edmund Burke types, deprived of their aristocracy, would be able to rule America anyway. True nerds figure stuff out. It's what they do. Under a constitution with one man, one vote, Burke-type elites would have no more power than anybody else. What they would need is some kind of vehicle that could take them to power. I ain't talking about a vintage Cadillac or Lincoln Continental or a decked out F-350 dually if you're a redneck. If you're a player, that could get you downtown. But you ain't gonna cruise the halls of power on Capitol Hill in that. Thomas Paine knew that Burke-type elites would need, and would have plenty enough money to buy, monster machines, known as corporations. And with enough of them, they'd be able to establish a virtual aristocracy, known as a corporatocracy. Under the section heading, "Corporate Rights Are a Perversion," Mr. Hartman says, Paine moved to head off the possibility of an American corporatocracy by insisting that neither government nor corporations should have rights. Rights, he argued, belong only to the people. Because this is crucially important, let me put this another way. In a real democracy, leaders are granted whatever power they have by the people. In the same way, in a real democracy, corporations are granted whatever rights, powers, or privileges they have by the people. They have absolutely no automatic rights of any kind, much less the right to rule our country. If you ever got an A on a test answering true to the statement, "We live in a democracy," good for you. Now answer a no horse crap question, true or false. According to ruling after ruling by the United States Supreme Court, corporations have the same rights under our United States Constitution as American citizens, as God's children. If you answered false, you need to take a reality pill, because in fact, in law, the answer is true. The fact that corporations have the same rights under our Constitution as God's children is law of the land, just as surely as if it had been written into our Constitution itself. And there ain't a damn thing that we can do about it, other than pass a constitutional amendment. In another book he wrote, Mr. Hartman shows one proposal for such an amendment. You can pause your player and read that if you want. There are other proposals that you can look up at movetoamend.org. Personally, I think this wording is straightforward, sensible, and effective. I would just like to see one line tacked on at the end, requiring justices of the Supreme Court to wipe their asses after they take a dump. That's because, to me, any judge who would rule that in a democracy corporations have the same rights as God's children has so little frickin' sense he needs to be told to wipe his ass. Would this line accomplish anything? Seems to me it'd serve as a message to future generations that we, the people of our age, took back our government with a vengeance. I want to jump away from Mr. Hartman for a minute to point out a big old problem that psychology nerds figured out a long time ago. It's a natural fact that human brains are kind of retarded when it comes to democracy. That's because human beings are social creatures who have a tendency to want to believe in supreme leaders who will keep them safe, save them from harm. Remember at the beginning of Vid 1, right at the beginning, I pointed out how roughly a third of Americans on this side, third on that side, kind of saw their candidate as a savior of sorts. This is how human brains work, and it is a problem. I didn't see those two candidates that way, because I see Thomas Paine and the men who put his ideas into our Constitution as the real saviors of our democracy. Thing is, my belief is kind of retarded too, because these men have been dead for around 200 years. We all need to get over the notion that some great leader is going to save us. All we've got is each other and the Lord above. We don't have any leaders in Washington. Damn few. Just politicians that have been raised up by these two corrupt corporations to do their bidding, competing to serve their real clients, the corporatocracy. Our founding fathers gave us the tools to take our democracy back. But before that can happen, a clear majority of us have got to change our way of thinking. First of all, the roughly 2/3 of Americans who believe that the other party is the problem need to please, for God's sake, just stop it. They are both the problem. Secondly, most everybody believes that the president is our most important political figure. Obviously, the president is important, but when it comes to crucial parts of our democracy, like elections and ratifying constitutional amendments, the president has nothing to do with that. That happens in the states, in your state. When it comes to those crucial parts of our democracy, the president is as useless as a screen door in a submarine, useless as red lights in a game of Grand Theft Auto. When it comes to those matters, your state representative is our most important political figure. The fact that only about 20% of Americans can even name their state legislator exposes this problem with human brains being kind of retarded when it comes to democracy. In order to be able to pass a constitutional amendment, ratify a constitutional amendment, would take the legislatures of at least 38 states. Do you even know who your state legislator is? Actually, legislators, because most of us have both the state house and the state senate. I actually had to Google to find out who my state senator was. I knew my state rep, but this is a huge problem. Another problem is a grassroots movement for we the people to take back our state legislatures from the two-party system is that it would not be supported by billionaire corporatists like the Tea Party movement or the Black Lives Matter movement. Those were largely, if not totally, what nerds call astroturf movements. In other words, fake grassroots movements. It should be common sense that in a government of the people, by the people, for the people, it's going to require the involvement of the people out there on the field of the political arena, fighting for democracy, not confined to this artificial habitat of a two-party system where we've been arranged like monkeys in a zoo into two groups throwing poop at each other. Toward the back of this book, Mr. Hartman gives a bunch of suggestions how to get involved. If you're like me, you might think it's silly calling or sending an email to your state representative. But then I thought about it, and I really would like to know how he feels about abolishing corporate personhood. I'd like to know how he feels about abolishing gerrymandering. I'd like to know how he feels about ranked choice voting or instant runoff elections, which would enable awesome candidates outside the two-party system to win, which is virtually impossible for them to do now. Another suggestion that Mr. Hartman gives is creating a third party. While it would be necessary to have a nationwide party to elect a president, why don't we have state-level parties? This is a suggestion that a lot of other nerds give. You could even have county level or individual state legislative district parties. Again, to elect awesome independent candidates who will represent you and serve you, not a corrupt two-party system. A suggestion that Mr. Hartman gives that would make Thomas Paine really proud is pamphlets. Just one side of one sheet of paper dealing with one issue. The best thing about that is handing them out, you would get the opportunity to talk with people, see how they feel about these issues. Just ask them, how do you feel about corporations having the same rights under our Constitution as God's children? Does that sound right to you? The important thing there is you want to talk with people, not talk down at them like coastal elite liberal, lefty liberals do. To finish up here, through the rest of chapter 5, Mr. Hartman gives more quotes from Thomas Paine where he gets into economics. In a nutshell, Paine believed that in a democracy, people or corporations getting rich off of exploiting national resources owed a fair amount back in the form of taxes to the nation that allowed them to exploit those resources to begin with. That way the nation and everybody in it prospers. This is an excellent book, but because I want to give my beloved viewers as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, then go into more depth later, as Mr. Hartman brilliantly does, that's why I'm going to nerd whisper this book next. I'm pretty sure Mr. Hartman would agree that Catherine Cryer does an excellent job of putting stuff in a nutshell. I'm sure he would also agree that she's better looking than he is, and could most likely whoop his ass in a bar fight, making her more relatable to my redneck viewers. I'll be nerd whispering Patriot Acts over the next dozen or so episodes. Hope you join me. If you like this video, why not click the like button? I'll put a link to the next episode over here.